Well, guys, it seems there is at least a few things in the lockdown files released so far that is interesting, so we'll go through them here. First off is the fact that Matt Hancock, the slimy snake, did all he could to keep schools closed while also muzzling kids for no good reason. This, as you know, has caused untold damage to kids and their futures and will continue to do so. Be it babies to older kids, the damage was real and we had parents falling for the propaganda who then became terrified of life. These you might still see now with people walking around muzzled or sitting alone in a car wearing a mask. All of that stems from the things in these messages. I mean, here we have the Masks in School one, for example. This, as you know, was an abhorrent policy that made no sense and many people had actually said. Yeah, as you can see here, it wasn't implemented as a medical need, but to save an argument, it claims. This is shocking enough, but really the argument there is the wrong word to use. What they mean is it wasn't worth risking people picking holes in their crap. To go against what Sturgeon was doing up north, they would have had to admit that masks didn't help, so it wasn't an argument they avoided, but instead avoided admitting the measures being pushed were bollocks. Remember, our own government admitted themselves that they needed to increase the fear levels among the public. Making people wear masks was part of the plan to keep that level of fear up for those who are already worried about it. Now though, let's move on to Hancock keeping schools closed, because this, while not exactly shocking to many of us, should be shown to as many people as possible, because the damage done to kids is literally as bad as it gets. Even Sir Desmond Swain called this out in Parliament, among many others.
It falls to us, however, to decide whether the price is worth paying in terms of the misery and unemployment that it generates. A generation marred in their life chances, mind-boggling borrowing that we will have to repay over years, which will diminish proper investment in public services and industry. All that, and for what? The Secretary of State has told us this week that the average number of deaths is consistent with the long-term average for this time of year.
Yeah, this we know happened, but having the details of who and why they did it is not something I'll moan about, as it will wake us up to the sham. Now, Hancock's attack on his fellow Tory MP that the Telegraph are focusing on I don't much care about, because why would I? No, what I care about is the effect on the public, which we all know was very real. This is something they all knew would be the case, and yet they did it anyway. This is actually why I take issue with this story here, acting like Boris Johnson didn't want lockdowns and all of that. At the same time, they put out another article that has him celebrating the fact people got fined £10,000 for breaking the same bullshit laws politicians were breaking. Yeah, remember, Partygate was a thing, even if the media used it for a political coup. This, as I said in my first video on these messages, shows the media are setting a narrative, so while the messages can be useful to us, remember they're hiding so much more information it's probably unreal. The media are neck deep in this, the same as politicians are, and we must always remind people of that fact. Now, another thing I do take a major issue with when it comes to the article talking about Boris Johnson wanting to lift lockdowns is them blaming the public for keeping it going. This has to be the most shameless and scummy thing I've ever heard, because the public didn't think this at all. They had been terrified into irrational fear because of government-sponsored propaganda that the media happily pumped out 24 hours a day. In fact, the media for nearly 18 months refused to report anything remotely positive and instead pumped out doom and gloom, often at the government's request. Then the media tried to keep it going when the government was trying to remove restrictions, so blaming the public is just bollocks in my view. Yes, people got led by sheep.
What do you want? When do you want it?
But at the end of the day, they had military psychological warfare tactics being used against them, so most people would fall for it. Those who see through it from the start or at any point during it should be proud, because them sort of tactics cost billions to develop and are meant to be used to subvert an enemy's population, not your own. But blaming public opinion they deliberately created is beyond taking the piss and actually shows the sort of scum we're dealing with on this. Next up though, we got this report here talking about text messages relating to the second lockdown and the dodgy data some might remember I covered at the time, yet they locked us down anyway. Some of you might remember my video about the 4,000 death models that had already been debunked before they said it on national TV with the second lockdown. Shit, even Sir Desmond Swain called out dodgy data months before then.
Now, I will make myself very unpopular, But I believe that the appearance of the chiefs last week should have been a sacking offence. When they presented that graph, with the caveat that it wasn't a prediction, but nevertheless, it was clear that they presented it as a plausible scenario, with its 50,000 cases per day by October, based on the doubling of infections by the week. Not once, not on one day since March, have there been infections on that day that were double that of the day of the week preceding. Not once. Where did this doubling come from? What was their purpose in presenting such a graph? It was the purpose of the fat boy in Pickwick Papers. I wants to make your flesh creep. It was Project Fear. It was an attempt to terrify the British people as if they haven't been terrified enough.
Yeah, that there was in September 2020, and we have various articles at the time reporting the dodgy data before it got memory hold and lockdown 2 continued regardless.
Now is the time to take action because there is no alternative. And from Thursday until the start of December, you must stay at home. You may only leave home for specific reasons.
In fact, I've just checked and it seems that YouTube has removed the video of me talking about it in November 2020. This, as many of you know, they've done lots of times, which also makes Big Tech as responsible as media and political tosspots, so let's not leave them out. But moving on, Professor Carl Hennigan, as the text message shows, called this out at the time, but if memory serves, Hancock did all he could to publicly refute it and the media did his bidding. Big Tech also did the same because they censored a lot of scientists calling it out, we must remember.
The Great Barrington Declaration is underpinned by two central claims, and both are emphatically false.
Next, we have an article about the government mocking the people they locked up in quarantine hotels, which is disgusting, of course, but not surprising for these scumbags. In fact, I have a video from one of them hotel quarantines here.
And you're social distancing here, exercising. No, excuse me, he can't speak to us, it's his right. They are not prisoners. I'm having a conversation with him. No, I'm talking to him.
You don't need permission, we're outside. We're outside.
Permission?
Dude,
I don't need your permission to talk to somebody across the fence.
no, you don't.
Permission. I do not.
No, our rights.
I can talk to whoever I want to talk to.
No, yes, I can.
Yes, I can. You go find out before I report you. Before I report you.
Please find his name. This is wrong. You cannot tell him who he can and can't speak to.
If I am wrong, you can go to the office.
We don't need to go anywhere. We're having a discussion, thank you.
But now you understand, right?
My goodness. Okay, and that's the £1,700 you pay?
1750.
50.
Okay.
We're so sorry.
Don't worry.
Have a good one.
Look after yourself.
Take care, you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, people paid 1,750 quid to be locked in there and these idiots mocked them for it. I would say you couldn't make it up, but that's what they did for 2 years, as we know. This is even more of a piss take though when you factor in the government paying for hotels to take in boat migrants. They have no right to be here, but Brits and tourists got forced to pay for hotel prisons they couldn't actually leave. Illegal immigrants can come and go as they please, but people in these places couldn't, and that should never be forgotten. Next up though, we've got reports of text messages from Hancock telling the police to get heavy-handed with anyone breaking the demented rules they'd all been breaking, so once again showing you just how scummy the whole thing was. This, when put alongside the parties in Downing Street and Hancock shagging his taxpayer-funded aid, takes the piss even more, and it's actually a great thing to show the people out there who still think they wasn't lied to about all this. In fact, that there is a good thing about all of this here, because while we knew most of it before these messages came out, it does make it easier to wake people up to the bullshit, which is always good news.